Powered by the Montana Television Network. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Russ Riesinger. Advocates of school choice, which often means public aid for private schools, won a huge victory today in a Montana case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In a 5-4 ruling, the High Court says Montana's state constitution cannot prevent such aid from going to religious schools. That means a state income tax credit that helps fund scholarships for students at private religious schools will be reinstated. But as MTN's Mike Dennison explains, the political battle over the issue in Montana is far from over.
The decision Tuesday is a victory for 3 families whose children attend Stillwater Christian School in Kalispell. They benefited from a private scholarship program funded indirectly through a $150 state tax credit. But the Montana Supreme Court struck down the 2015 tax credit program, saying it violated Montana's constitutional provision that prohibits public aid to churches or any religiously affiliated organization, including schools. On Tuesday, the U.S. Supreme Court majority said that rationale violates the U.S. Constitution's Freedom of Religion Clause and reversed the Montana court. Lead plaintiff Kendra Espinoza, whose 2 daughters attend Stillwater, said she was thrilled by the decision.
We were yipping and hollering this morning about this, so this is very exciting. What this means for us is that we get to continue our enrollment there. This ensures that we have that ability to, with scholarships, when scholarships are available, that means that we have that ability to continue at Stillwater Christian School with that education that they have thrived at and they've done so well with.
And a Montana group that's long advocated for school choice says the decision could pave the way for expanding such programs in Montana. Jeff Laszloffy of the Montana Family Foundation says his group will be looking at school choice options that have worked in other states and perhaps propose them here.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Other states have been at this for a long time, but Montana students can now fully participate in the broad array of school choice options because this onerous Blaine Amendment has been relegated to the trash heap of history, so to speak.
The Blaine Amendment is the name for language in many state constitutions that bar state aid to religious schools. The High Court said it cannot be applied to prohibit state aid from flowing to religious schools. Lawyers for Espinoza and the other Kalispell parents said Montana's tax credit program must now be reinstated. The case now goes back to the Montana Supreme Court, which will iron out the details on how the program proceeds. Yet Rafe Graybill, chief counsel to Governor Bullock and the state's lead attorney on the case, notes that Montana's constitution still has strong language guaranteeing a public education.
It does one significant thing, which is it says if the state is going to finance private education, it has to finance religious and non-religious private education equally. But it would be a mistake to read this ruling as saying that the state has any obligation to finance private schools in the first place.
That's up to future legislatures and governors to decide. And the state's largest public sector union, which represents public school teachers, says it's considering further legal action to challenge the tax credit program. Montana Federation of Public Employees President Amanda Curtis told MTN News that Tuesday's ruling is a threat to public school funding nationwide.
This activist court has handed down a ruling that will siphon off potentially billions of dollars from the public education system in America, making our jobs harder and harder.
Well, let's just say this issue isn't going away and may figure in this year's campaigns for governor and other offices. Reporting from Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
And dissenting Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said the Montana Supreme Court ruling should have been upheld because it did not discriminate against religious schools by invalidating the entire tax credit. Well, critics of today's court ruling warn it could have a devastating impact on public schools in Montana. Others believe it will enhance education opportunities in the state. That includes Billings State Representative Bill Mercer, a former U.S. attorney for Montana.
Competition in the educational environment, just like many other environments, is something that we typically embrace in this society. So, I do think that the critics have been over the top from the beginning until today, and I think that the school choice option is something that we will see if it can flourish and create opportunities, even greater opportunities for students in Montana, which I think is what we're all in favor of, and certainly what the legislature was trying to do in 2015.
Mercer is a partner with the Holland Hart law firm that represented the plaintiffs in this case. We also reached out to CBS court contributor Ilya Shapiro to get his perspective. He told us while the High Court's ruling is very straightforward, he was surprised that the Montana Supreme Court's remedy was to do away with the tax credit program altogether.
For the Montana Supreme Court to say, okay, legislature, we don't like kind of hair splitting between religious and secular, so we'll get rid of the program altogether. That's just unusual. It reminds me of something from the states that were resisting desegregation orders in the 60s, which said we'll just close the public pools and create so-called private ones just for whites. And so, yeah, I think the Montana Supreme Court bit off more than it could chew.
Shapiro is the director for the Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. A dire warning today from the nation's top infectious disease expert about the exploding number of coronavirus cases across the country.
We are now having 40,000+ new cases a day. I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day.
Dr. Anthony Fauci told a Senate panel that we clearly are not in control of the virus right now. Well, health officials said they're ramping up testing, new treatments, and expect a vaccine in coming months. Fauci warned that at least 70% of Americans must be vaccinated to establish herd immunity. And even then, he said there is no guarantee. Well, tonight there are 310 confirmed active COVID-19 cases across the state. That includes an employee at a nursing home in Crow Agency. The care facility announced on its Facebook page today that that employee was asymptomatic and had not had any contact with other residents or staff for 90 hours. Well, just one day after Montana broke the single-day record for new cases, today the state reported 49 more positives. 12 people are in the hospital tonight. 659 people have recovered as the total number of cases now nears 1,000 in Montana. Montana Governor Steve Bullock says he's concerned with the spike in COVID numbers, but he's not ready to roll back on business openings or impose further restrictions. He told Q2's news director John Stepanek today he's counting on Montanans to step up and meet this challenge.
So I certainly hope we don't take steps backwards, at least statewide. You look at Bighorn County as an example, put in more restrictive requirements than what I've done at the state of Montana. And I encourage local communities to exercise that when it's appropriate. I don't want to go back, take steps back, but that's not dependent on me. It's dependent on two things, one of which the virus, and second of which, how we as Montanans act and react. I think with the cases that we're seeing and the spread, I'm not looking at a phase 3 certainly yet. We'll just continue to monitor both what the disease is doing and how Montanans are acting.
Bullock also says he wants to see students return to the classroom in August and that he will work with school administrators to map out guidelines for elementary, high school, and college so all students get some in-class teaching time. And you can find Bullock's entire interview on ktvq.com. Some important news tonight for Montana small businesses as the Senate passed a bill to extend the PPP application deadline to August 8th now. That deadline was set to expire at midnight tonight. The bill is now on its way to the U.S. House. So far, Montana small businesses have received more than $1.7 billion in COVID relief funding. A suspect who allegedly gunned down a 24-year-old Billings man back in April is now in custody. Billings police say 34-year-old James Fisher was arrested last night in connection with the murder of Brett Ness. Ness died on April 27th after he was shot in the head outside a home on Florine Lane. Lieutenant Brandon Woolley says Fisher was arrested without incident near 6th Avenue North and North 22nd Street. 18-year-old Raisha Blacksmith was previously arrested in connection with the homicide and charged with felony obstruction. And an update surrounding a shooting last night in the 200 block of Prickett Lane. Billings police say both the victim and the suspect are teenagers. Lieutenant Woolley says a 16-year-old boy was shot last night just after 5 o'clock there on Prickett Lane. The victim was taken to the hospital with unknown injuries. Woolley also says police have now arrested a 17-year-old boy. He's being held at youth services on a possible charge of assault with a weapon. And a Yellowstone County Sheriff's deputy is on paid administrative leave tonight after shooting a suspect yesterday afternoon. Sheriff Mike Linder says law enforcement officers were attempting to recover a reported stolen vehicle at the town pump at King Avenue West and 32nd Street when the driver of the car rammed a police car, then drove at Deputy Brandon Smart, who was outside his vehicle. That's when Smart shot at the stolen car. Suspects led police into the soccer fields at Amen Park before crashing into a ditch. The male driver was struck by a bullet, and his female passenger, they were both taken to the hospital. All right, turning to weather now and a first look at the forecast with Chief Forecaster Bob McGuire. Bob, we know the heat is on the horizon. We'll be looking at chances of thunderstorms.
Yeah, well, we had some nice ones tonight moving to the Billings area. Let me show you. Here's the way it looked earlier this evening. Look at that line of thunderstorms moving past the Billings area. Billings over there on the left side of your screen there. And as you'll notice, the storms had a little bit of hail in them. That's the blue stuff there. And then about the time they got the cold strip, the storms just started falling apart. And now they're starting to make their way in towards the Miles City area. Just seeing some light rain out of it now. But the big story is this upper level low pressure cell took moisture from eastern Montana, wrapped it around that low, and then swung that whole line of showers back towards the Billings area earlier today. And so tomorrow we have a marginal risk of severe thunderstorms moving into central Montana. Billings will be part of that risk, so we'll see what happens with that. And then it looks like by the time the showers get going, I think it's going to be sometime maybe by 5 or 6 o'clock, we'll start to see those thunderstorms move into the Billings area. We'll have more about that coming up in a few more minutes. Russ?
All right, thank you, Bob. Senator Steve Daines is taking action and asking the Inspector General of the U.S. Postal Service for an in-depth investigation after a Billings veteran's remains were lost in the mail. We brought you the story of Donald Tyler, who died from COVID-19 while traveling with his wife Christine overseas back in March. Our cameras were there when Christine finally got her late husband's ashes returned in a broken urn after months of questions regarding where Don was located. Now, Daines says it's unacceptable for a federal agency to misplace human remains and is now urging a full and thorough investigation. The Republican senator also asking that any necessary moves are taken to ensure a similar incident doesn't happen again. That urn was located at a USPS facility in Chicago last month. Daines has told the family he's securing military honors for Don's burial in July. Well, COVID-19 has thrown us all a curve that we didn't see coming, including pro baseball. Today, Major League Baseball made the announcement that it will not provide minor league teams with players this year, ending what little hope there was of salvaging a season for minor league teams, including the Billings Mustangs. This will be the first time in its history that minor league baseball has not been played. Still ahead on tonight's Q2 10 o'clock news, racially charged social media posts have one Billings principal at the center of an investigation. We'll hear from Public School Superintendent Greg Upham. Then a little later in sports, the home of champions rodeo wiped away this year, but Scott catches up with a hometown Hall of Famer who has some wild stories from the 4th of July hotspot.
You're watching MTN News with Janelle Slade and Russ Riesinger. Storm Tracker weather with Bob McGuire. And sports with Scott Breen. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.